Now we're going to switch gears and talk about parenthood. And then, like I said in the beginning of this lecture, we're going to talk about parenthood broadly, and then we're going to talk about motherhood and fatherhood separately. For most people, parenthood is a choice. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule. Accidents happen, mistakes happen, but by and large, it is a choice. And maybe you've already experienced this in your own life, and or you've heard of your older siblings experiencing this, or other people in your family. And if not, that you often hear this message even in the media. This idea that you might hear it from other parents saying like, "Oh my gosh, you have to have children. When are you having children? Children are gonna make your life so much better because you're caring for this other person." And you're just so invested. You can't imagine the love like that. Now, some of that can certainly be true for at least some people, but there's also been a lot of research on what it means to be a childless adult and how are childless adults in terms of their overall well-being and life satisfaction. And what the research has found, and these findings are complicated, but by and large, the childless adults, and this is particularly true for females, are just as happy as those who are parents when they're in midlife and old age. So this goes against common knowledge because we are always hearing that like, oh, you have to have kids. Why aren't you having kids? And there are definitely moments where people are shaming people who choose not to have kids or looking at them like they're weird. But again, no significant difference in many ways between childless adults and those who are with children. We also know that children don't make a marriage stronger, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. The fertility rates and the number of children that people are having over time has declined. This could be for various reasons. One, we are waiting later to have children. And we already talked about emerging adulthood where, you are stepping into those adult roles as early as we once did. This means that the window for having children is shorter. And all the window for engaging in sexual behaviors is just as long, but we also have different methods of birth control. People are also struggling in today's economy more than maybe in other decades. This doesn't apply to everyone, obviously, but people are becoming more and more aware of how expensive children's are, and if it is a choice to become a parent, they're thinking of, can I afford this? Is this something I can actually do? So those are a couple of the reasons why fertility rates have declined. But it's varied from person to person. Because of the shrinking fertility rates, there are some places around the world, and Italy is an example of a place who actually give baby bonuses to people who conceive because they want to strengthen their population. So it's not a requirement, certainly, or I mean, it's kind of like getting taxes in the US. You get some of your money back because of the money you're spending on your child. It's a little bit different from this baby bonus from taxes, but still this idea that because we are concerned about our population, and this is going to be in some places more than others, maybe we need to convince people to have more children. As I mentioned, the research by and large shows that parenthood doesn't make one's marriage stronger. But let's talk about what we do see emerging from the research. I think it'll be interesting to think about these things in a few months after I have my baby. But for right now, I'm relying on the research, which is better than anecdotal evidence anyway. So, this research about the transition to parenthood and how it affects marriage is longitudinal research, or much of it is. So, looking at what does a relationship look like before children and what does it look like after. And so, these are some of the findings that have emerged, but this is not exhaustive. So, one, couples tend to report feeling and being less intimate and less happy after they have children, especially during the early parts of development, so when they have infants. So here, less intimacy, I do mean sexual behaviors, but I also mean just sharing with one another, disclosing with one another. So there are multiple components. And part of this is because of less sleep or more stress. Some people feel like they're shifting from their roles from a lover or partner and partner in a romantic way to just fellow worker, getting things done, kind of more task oriented. Not every relationship is going to look this way, and it doesn't mean that this is going to be forever, but a lot of people report that this is what's happening for them. Parenthood also tends to produce more traditional and potentially more conflict-ridden marital roles. So what does this mean? This is kind of more of a heteronormative view, but the gender roles just become more distinct. Women say that oftentimes, again, not every relationship, that they have even more housework after the baby, and women are more likely to leave their job to stay home and take care of with the baby. Now, if that's a choice, like that's cool, like go women, go that relationship. But sometimes women report feeling angry, like they didn't have a choice in that matter, like their significant other was just unwilling to even think about the idea of, let's say, being a stay-at-home parent, if that's what works for that family, or feeling more angry because the housework isn't shared. Why does this happen? Why do we, let's say you had a couple who were more egalitarian where duties were split evenly. So it wasn't like, man work and women work. Well, I mean, it's just adding another person to the mix, and it's a change to the whole system. So going to that family systems theory that we talked about in adolescence, we're looking at each partner and each player in the family and how we have this disequilibrium when something changes. Well, adding a baby to the mix is definitely something that changes. Parents might also argue about how they're parenting, so parenting style conflicts. If one parent, for example, is too rough, or one spoils too much, or one, gives in too easily, or, this, that, and the other. This can cause parents to argue with one another, and it could affect their marital satisfaction. Maybe not forever, but, until they kind of figure out the common rules. When we look at the research on parents who, work together and hold their marriage together, this is typically the case for people who are securely attached because they're open to listening to their partner's views. They're sharing their emotions. They're communicating with their partner. And so they're able to work through these conflicts and issues that they're having. Similarly, for those individuals who didn't argue very much before the child, so had a pretty happy or conflict, I wouldn't say completely conflict free because that wouldn't be a normal expectation for a relationship. But if they have just a good, solid, communicative relationship beforehand, when you add more stress to the mix, yes, maybe that adds more stress, but it doesn't necessarily have to lead to negative outcomes. For this section on motherhood specifically, you might feel like a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about have rather a negative feel to them. And why is that the case? That's the case because parenting is difficult. Parenting is stressful. It's not to say that it's not surrounded by good moments and happy memories, but there are lots of stressors that are added into the mix when a child is added into the mix. And so, just to get started with this, again, we're talking about motherhood specifically here, and we'll talk about fatherhood in just another slide or so. But mothers of young children, so we're talking about infants and toddlers in particular, based on research, report the lowest levels of day-to-day happiness compared to other women. I mean, if we talk about engaging in more of the caregiving duties and worrying about their child, potentially being stressed about financial costs of raising children, but more of it is about trying to make sure that your child is learning everything that you think that they need to learn and also staying safe. Because if anybody's interacted with a young toddler, you know that they can easily get into trouble. Um, That said, it's complicated by children's own temperament, and we have already talked about this in the first part of the course. So if we have children who have difficult temperaments, so those are the temperaments where they're easily upset, easily angered, easily frustrated, harder to calm, harder to soothe, and maybe more resistant to discipline, like the children who are going to laugh at you when you try to discipline them. What's going to happen is that the parent, mom in this situation, is going to feel more irritated, and perhaps it affects her ability to, think that she's doing a good job, which could ultimately affect self-esteem and just, feeling less competent. Compared to if you have an easy child who, again, if you just use the word disappointed, then they're like, oh, all right, I'll stop doing what I'm doing, or who isn't easily frustrated, this is going to make it more easy to be that warm parent, where there's a lot of love shared and positive emotion. Mom is going to feel more competent overall. So each relationship is different too, because if you have three kids, we might have two kids that are easy and one kid that's difficult. That can affect each relationship and the outcomes in terms of how mom feels about it. Which brings me to this last point, is that even though parents are always saying, like, oh, I love my children all equally, and I can't pick which one I love more or which one I prefer, when moms are actually given anonymous surveys that are purely anonymous, there's no way that people would know, their children aren't going to find out. We tend to see that moms don't love all their children equally, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if a parent's not trying to let their preferences show or say that they have favorites, like those are good things. But when we look at which children are more preferred or loved more in some ways, it's typically the child who is the easiest child, has that easy temperament, more successful, because perhaps it goes back to this parent feeling more competent in their role as parent.